Hello, everyone. This is Dragon Ninja Rider here with a brand new mini episode of reviews from an honest fangirl. A truth universally acknowledged that Jane Austen is the best writer of all time, and you cannot change my mind on that. In this episode, I'll be going over sequels to my favorite Jane Austen novel, Pride and Prejudice. I am very glad, needless to say, I decided to do strictly a voiceover episode for December because, as I kind of predicted from years past, chaos has ensued because it is the holiday season. We have had several dramas pop up in the family, so I'm lucky I'm getting just this done. I appreciate all the any love and support I can get. To my loyal fan base, the few that you are. So I will be going ahead and just going over some of my favorite tiny bits of Pride and Prejudice sequels. All right, we're going to kick off this episode with a drive-by bio of the lovely lady writer that is Jane Austen. She was from a middle-class family, grew up during the lived during the Regency era. Her first novel was actually Sense and Sensibility, and it was simply signed as written by a lady. And then when Pride and Prejudice came out in 1813, it was simply signed as the author of Sense and Sensibility. Jane Austen had a lot of great commentary on how women were treated during her time, a lot of tongue-in-cheek and witticisms and sarcasm, because women were treated fairly poorly, especially when it came to inheriting family riches and so forth. Women really weren't, in very rare cases, were lucky enough to inherit family fortunes. But most of the time, in states that were entailed to male members of the family. So the women tended to be thrown out into the cold a lot, which is pretty much what happened to the main characters, the Dashwood sisters, in the first novel, her first written novel, Sense and Sensibility. And this is brought up again in Pride and Prejudice, of course, with Mr. Bennet's estate is not able to be entailed to his daughters, including the main character, Elizabeth Bennet, but the pompous dear cousin that is Mr. Collins. Yes, Mr. Collins. Anyway, so she was very much a trailblazer of her time, and it's kind of sad and ironic too because, like a lot of people, they didn't make a lot of money when they were alive from their works. Actually, for her to get her books published, she had to have her brother do it for her to be able to have it published. Again, commentary on the time that she lived in. Her second novel tends to be her most beloved and most renowned of all her completed works. Pride and Prejudice being, of course, about the lovely Miss Elizabeth Bennet, who is the second eldest of 5 sisters, and her going from hate to love relationship with the main male character, the very quiet and insufferable Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. Pride and Prejudice is a superly famous, beloved book. It ends up always being in the least top 10 of any best of all time novels list, and for good reason. Her prose was pristine and elegant, and she was a very witty lady, and she certainly deserves all the love and praise that she gets, because she deserves it, because she was good, and that's what makes her truly one of my favorite authors of all time. I am not much of a romance person, but Jane Austen is certainly someone I make an exception for, because her stories were so well written. Though Pride and Prejudice, of course, is my favorite, and the only one that I've actually truly read the full way through. I've started reading Sense and Sensibility, but it's definitely a darker toned one than Pride and Prejudice. And I've watched many movie adaptations of all the novels, but Pride and Prejudice is the only one I've read fully and several times over. because that's the one I love. All right, moving along to the sequels themselves. I'd like to point out I only cover sequels. I do not care for nor read variations. Variations are the what ifs, if you would. What if certain events had happened in a different direction? Maybe this is how it would have gone, kind of thing. For me, those only work for DC and Marvel Comics. It doesn't really work for Pride and Prejudice. That kind of thing just doesn't really, to me, work very well with a Regency romance novel. Just no. I prefer sequels. I like things that take place just as or after Elizabeth and Darcy and Jane and Bingley get married at the end of Pride and Prejudice. I prefer those books. I like thinking about them being married and all the things that take place and all the adventures and so forth they go through after they're married. I prefer that stuff, hence the focus of this video. The first one I'm covering is Death Comes to Pemberley. Funny enough, a murder mystery. It was written by the prolific mystery writer who was P.D. James. This book takes place several years after the original novel. When it starts up, Elizabeth and Darcy have 2 sons by the point the novel starts. And the drama, and of course, everything that comes to them and stirs, of course, is sparked by who else but Wickham and Elizabeth's sister, Lydia. Because Lord knows those two. Anybody's going to bring drama, it's going to be those two because they're so irresponsible. So that, for me, in and of itself, I found enjoyable. However, Goodreads was not as nice. When I went on there real quick to refresh myself for some of it, and then I glanced through it again, but when I was preparing for this, but Goodreads doesn't seem to like Death Comes to Pemberley that much. The fans of P.D. James's other works don't seem to care for, I guess, the Jane Austen characters or just the way she wrote the murder mystery. It's in of itself, it doesn't quite gel, I guess, with her other works. I guess from what I read. And those who are Jane Austen fans find it highly historically inaccurate, I guess. I mean, I don't think it's perfectly historically accurate, but I have a hard time, I guess, when it comes to the Regency era, I don't have a huge knowledge pool. Medieval times, Victorian era, and World War II. Those are my niche in British history. Those are the ones, I could go all day. I know much more about what the goings-ons in ye old Britannia in those time periods than I do the Regency era. I have a very narrow knowledge of it. And most of what I get is simply from enjoying Jane Austen novels. And that's still kind of limited. So I guess some of the historical stuff must be lost on me or went over my head or whatever. So I can't per se say on the historical accuracy on it of that point, but I still find it a highly enjoyable read. If you're not too hung up on historical inaccuracies, I guess, that are in there, I highly recommend it. I give it a solid 4 stars. Super enjoyable. The movie it's based off it, highly enjoyable. The leading lady from Bletchley Circle, funny enough, which is a World War II series about the ladies who helped decode, the German messages during World War II. The first lead from that series, cursed, I can't remember her name. She ended up being Elizabeth Bennet in Death Comes to Pemberley, and I loved it. I loved all of it. I liked the guy who they got to play Mr. Darcy. Super enjoyable, fun read and fun watch. I myself enjoy it immensely. Highly recommend it if you're not a huge, stickler for historical accuracies, I guess. On to the next mystery series we've got here is the Mr. and Mrs. Darcy mysteries. There are 7 total in the series. Super enjoyable. All her characters get to meet the Darcys over the 7 books, granted under, dark circumstances, including Sanderton, apologies if I mispronounced it, which was Jane Austen's final novel that she never finished. That was I think the last one she was working on before she passed away. She was in her 40s, I believe, when she passed on. She was fairly young when she passed away. There's some dippy supernatural moments in some of them that I really do not care for. But other than that, I find them really adorable, rather nice reads, definitely in your more cozy mystery genre. I love it when Elizabeth and Eleanor talk. I enjoyed it deeply when Emma and Elizabeth and Mr. Kingsley and Darcy met. I enjoyed their interactions very much so. It's one of those great quote unquote crossover moment kind of things when you get to see characters, your favorite characters, all meet up together. It's super, super fun. I really, really enjoyed that. So I give this one a solid 5 stars, despite the, well, maybe 4.5 stars. I'll take off half a star for the supernatural dippiness, but other than that, really, really enjoyable read. If you're a cozy mystery fan and a Jane Austen fan, and you haven't read it, I highly recommend this series because it covers both of those boxes. All right, on to a sequel that does not include murder. It's kind of, I'm not gonna lie, I have read a lot of Pride and Prejudice sequels, and there's so many I have really not liked. I'm particularly picky, but this series that certainly passed my pickiness list was Anne Elliot's Diary series. Volume 1 and 2 were for Georgiana Darcy, Darcy's sister, and then there was a quote-unquote third book that was Kitty Bennet's diary, which is Elizabeth's younger sister. And that one takes place after the events that take place in Georgiana's diaries. Very, very enjoyable reads. If you're very much a stickler for history, a little bit, at least for the Regency era, more so than I am, this is a very highly enjoyable read. Like I said, I'm not super knowledgeable on certain things when it comes to the Regency era. I have a general thumbnail version idea of things, but enough to get by when I'm reading these kind of books. This one really, you can tell the details were crucial to Anne Elliot when she wrote these. It involves the Georgiana ones involve her chasing after the cousin Colonel Fitzwilliam to battle, and they end up at the field of Waterloo, where the British Napoleon took his last stand against the British, and it was one of the bloodiest battles of that time period, certainly for definitely in British history. And I know enough about Waterloo and so forth, so that I could appreciate a lot of the detailing that obviously went into historical readings that went into it. So if you're much more of a stickler for historical accuracy, Anne Elliot does a very good job at that. It's a 5-star rating for me. There's a lot of sweet moments between our beloved favorite characters from Pride and Prejudice, both Elizabeth and Darcy, as well as Charles and Jane, that really make it enjoyable. That's the big thing for me for sequels, is I want to have a lot of those sweet moments between the couples, especially, of course, obviously Elizabeth and Darcy, mostly. That's a given. Really, really enjoyable reads. Very, very good. The first one was, I think, a Kindle Unlimited read. Then the other two I just straight up bought on the Kindle, and really, really I just ate them up. They were so good. Definitely 5 stars. Worth reading if you're a very, very big Jane Austen fan. Last but not least, I'm going to include a little bonus thing here. Adaptations. There are very few adaptations out there for Pride and Prejudice, but these are the two that I've come across that I've enjoyed that are in graphic format. I've mentioned this before. I mentioned this back in the Halloween special of the Magna Classics adaptations. And of course, they did a Pride and Prejudice one, and I love it. I have a copy of it. I really, really enjoy it. It's beautifully drawn. It's very, very loyal to the novel, and I've read the novel several times over, so there was very little they skimped on because it's a very thick novel, the Magna version, and it does a very good job adapting it, and super enjoyable, super enjoyable. And Marvel I didn't realize this, I did back in the day, I discovered this when I was working at the library. I discovered that Marvel had done a classic series, and included Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and I can't remember any rest of them, but I know they definitely did Pride, Prejudice, and Sense and Sensibility. I was able to get Sense and Sensibility for the library shelf, but I wasn't able to get Pride and Prejudice sold out. I read it. I got an interlibrary loan. I read it. I thought it was highly enjoyable. The artwork did not reflect the covers. That was something I forgot until I looked this up on Goodreads, and then people were commenting and complaining about the art style. And it was something I hadn't really thought about until I really reflected on it again. I'm like, you know what? They're not wrong. I remember being a little displeased with the artwork. Overall, though, still pleasant read. If you've got a younger teenager who's not huge into Pride and Prejudice, either of these versions would be really great for them because it brings to life the novel, and so some nuances in that they might not understand or get bogged down with in the actual original novel might not bog them down with the story and appreciate some of the dialogue a little better by reading the comic book versions of it. I really highly recommend the Magna Classics a little bit more than I do the Marvel one, though the Marvel one's still pretty decent. It definitely was targeted for a more teen audience, if you can't tell by the cover. Trying to do a cosmopolitan kind of, Teen Vogue kind of thing with the cover. Regardless, still kind of really worth mentioning. Very, very nice series. So, and with that, I'm going to wrap up this video pretty much for the most part. Thank you for watching this mini episode of Reviews from an Honest Fangirl. Like I said, there was a lot of drama going around in my family. We're still kind of going through some currently, actually. There was I also got some bad news recently. I talk about that in my blog post, my current blog post. That's on dragonninjawriter.com. Click on the link below to get all that up-to-date information about that disappointing news that I received. I'm really appreciative if you sat through this episode. I really, really hope to do a full episode in January. I will be doing Ranger's Apprentice come what may. Probably will be later in the month than I usually post because it's going to take a bit because there's 12 novels in the main series. So I really want to do Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan because that is easily, to me, one of the best YA series of all time. And so I really desperately want to do it. Also, at some point, I really wish to do a proper video for Pride and Prejudice, analyzing it and so forth, and giving it all the love that it deserves, especially talking about the movies and the Magna adaptation of it and so forth, and the history behind it and everything in much greater detail. So with that, I simply asked you, if you liked this video, to leave me a like below, show me some love, leave a comment below, like I said. If there's a Pride and Prejudice novel sequel you liked that you think I'd like, feel free to share below. Make sure to hit that subscribe bell. And with that, I wish you lots of love and a very Merry Christmas to all. And good night.